welcome to CEC Gurukul lecture. In continuation with the series on religion and society, in today's lecture we're going to discuss on topic of complex in the understanding of religion in contemporary society. And for this we're going to refer to an article on religion, media and globalization. Now, as already stated above, this religion and society is a core paper offered to first year students of multidisciplinary course under NEP 2020 and is a prescribed syllabus of Delhi University. So, today let us understand the complex way in which religion, media and globalization are connected. So, basically this is going to understand, the argument of the lecture is to understand the larger debate on secularization, and that is to understand that did modernity, rationality and growth of science made religion to do away with religion, or did religion become a kind of a practice which has mediated by the social media and has got a kind of a new identity with and a global identity. So, we are basically trying to understand whether religion and secularization are opposed to each other, or are they functioning in a kind of a continuum. So, to understand religion's growing presence in the world, we must see media not just as a tool, but as an environment that makes it possible. So, we try to understand 2 points of view. The first is the traditional view. Under the traditional view, people often treat religion, media and globalization as separate things, 3 separate domains, and these 3 domains were considered to be independent of each other, and there was no kind of connection or interaction between the 3. This is a kind of a traditional view, and to kind of understand the debate of social transformation, social change with the Reformation and the separation of the state from the church, religion and the nation were considered to be opposed to each other, and coming out from this argument was that religion is something which is practiced in the private sphere and state becomes a public institution. Now, this 3 kind of unconnected connection was part of the traditional view. Now, if you look into the contemporary understanding, then media becomes an essential inseparable from other domains. We cannot discuss modern religion and globalization without talking about media. So, the media becomes the center point and a linkage between religion and globalization, because it kind of creates a newer space, it creates a more wider space for discussion and discourse on religion, which is not only happening at a local level but also becomes a global discourse. So, media, which is basically the technology systems and way we receive information, creates the environment in which global religious life exists. Media isn't just a loudspeaker for religion, it's the air religion breathes globally. Now, these arguments and statements has been made in the context of secularization. Now, how do we then look into the growth of religion due to the proliferation of technology, and at the same time the emerging debates of secularization. So, the idea of secularization, or the thesis of secularization, was that religion was fading away and moving more in terms of a personalized practiced in a private sphere, and as the world modernizes, we see this debate of religion kind of secluded to the private and public space becomes a false narrative. Religion hasn't disappeared, it has simply been transformed and integrated into modern public and political life. Now, where are we kind of talking about is not kind of very general understanding or an argument, but we are referring to Jeremy Stolow's article titled Religious Media and Globalization. This is a chapter which is taken from the reader on religion, and here Stolow argues against the old secularization thesis, the idea that religion would naturally fade away as the world modernized. He is completely rejecting this idea. On the contrary, he argues that the modern secular nation state is actually parasitic on religious forms. Nationalism used sacred narratives like manifest destiny, myths of national awakening, and the cult of the glorious dead to maintain their own authority. So basically, there's a kind of a mindset or a misunderstanding that the nation state and religion are kind of separate to each other, but under the hidden garb, it is kind of practiced more than it was prior to the formation of nation state. So, how do we look into the intersection of religion, media, and globalization? So, in this chapter, Stolow highlights several ways that the intersection of religion, globalization, and the media creates a new social reality. Number one, terms like religious revival or class of civilizations are oversimplifications. Religion never really left. Rather, its visibility has changed because of how it is mediated. Therefore, it is not something which has kind of just gone away with the coming of modernity. Rather, modernity is kind of growth of science and technology, and with the growth of technology, we have multiple forms of media, which is now giving space to a kind of a more nuanced understanding of what religion is, how the rituals are practiced, how the community identities gets kind of more refined through the media. So instead of seeing a smartphone or a TV broadcast just as a pipe for information, we should see media as a space where the negotiation of religion and religious practices are kind of articulated, and this kind of it leads to the consumption of the various forms in which religion is practiced. So the final argument could be then that religion has not faded, religion is still there. It's where rituals are performed, faith is proclaimed, and communities are formed. Because communication circuits now penetrate both remote hinterland and intimate parts of everyday life. Religious movements can bypass national borders, creating global audience and target groups. The occurrence of jihadi videos, Pentecostal rallies, or atheist bus ads isn't just a revival but a mediated phenomena. So it's not just only creating a content, the media, but it's creating a content which is kind of also a representation of the particular political ideology, of the particular context in which the video or the media content is generated. Therefore, what we consume is a mediated phenomena, and it kind of can lead to a relearning or kind of redefinition of what religion is. But at the same time, we also need to keep in mind that medias aren't neutral tools. They form an environment enabling religious actors, and these actors could be believers, proselytizers, or foes. And these actors, they are able to operate across borders. And there are a number of examples that Stolow gives in the reading. And the first example is in terms of the Islamic outreach and jihadi sites. Digital platform globalized militancy, turning local grievances into worldwide spectacles. Pentecostal rallies or World Youth Days is a second example, where live events amplified via TV streaming creates transnational communities of petitioners and followers. The third is pop cultures like the Passion of the Christ. Blockbuster films make religious narrative mass market, blending faith with consumerism. But when we are talking about this interconnection between religion, media, and globalization in a discourse on a series on sociology, what we need to question is why media matters for sociologists. And that is kind of bringing in the entire new subdiscipline between sociology, where we talk about a lot about sociology of media, visual culture. And in that context, without media's circulatory system, that is internet, satellites, religion wouldn't penetrate remote hinterlands or intimate everyday lives so effectively. Traditional diagnosis overlook how media shapes religion. Smartphones and social media democratize rituals. For example, virtual Hajj participation. Platforms like YouTube or TikTok host moral campaigns, turning users into audience or targets. Viewers aren't passive. They remix content, creating hybrid identities. For example, new age apps blending yoga with global spirituality. So, therefore, when we have such a plethora of ways in which the media has mediated religion at a global level, we kind of have a new agenda for sociologists. That is, sociologists need to rethink the way in which religion has been studied, and this kind of mediated lens reveal religion as adaptive to globalization, sustaining public private presence amid secularization debate. And here Stolow kind of gives certain guidelines for or agenda for sociologists to keep in mind. And he says that researcher must look at number one, how media alters religious authority. For example, influencer versus the cleric, So there's a set of discourse which we kind of have from the cleric, and then it could be a discourse which kind of is in contradiction to this, or it could be kind of further strengthen the argument. So we have two kind of debate which could be in conflict with each other, that is of the influencer versus the cleric. Then second gender of sociologists is global circuits of religious content. The researchers must kind of look into the new forms in which the circulation is taking place. For example, Bollywood influencing diaspora Hindus. And the third agenda is power dynamics, to kind of understand or look into the questions of who control narratives in holy wars or anti-religious ads. So this will kind of not only allow us to study religion kind of in an isolated vacuum, but we then need to connect it to the wider political economic changes that is taking place, or even the strong political dynamics of the society which is being under study. So we try to understand these kind of questions or problems of terminology. So these are different terms, religious, global, mediated. What does these terms mean? And Jeremy Stolow kind of tell us that the way we define religion is itself a product of historical media and power structure. He warns against the normalist error, the mistake of treating religion, media, and globalization as three separate Lego bricks that we must plug together. Instead, he argues they are inextricably braided together. Sociologists are cautioned against reifying religion, treating it as fixed, ancient thing that existed before globalization or outside of media. So basically, he's questioning the way in which religion has been subject to study by sociologists, and therefore he kind of looks into certain myths and reality. So the misconception is that religion is a private matter of belief or faith that occasionally steps out into the public world. But the reality is that the very concept of belief and faith are not universal truth. They are specific ideas that grew out of a Western Christian historical context. The way we study religion today is shaped by specific historical forces. Early definitions of religion were often created to categorize the other, and the other could be the Jews, the Muslims, the Hindus, and primitive groups in relation to Christianity. Tools like philosophy, the study of language, and archaeology were used by colonial era scholars to create a universal definition of religion. By creating a globally category called religion, scholars forced different culture into a Western classification system. Practices or tradition that did not have a word for religion in their own native language were suddenly redefined to fit into categories like belief, rituals, or institutions. Globalization didn't just spread religion, it defined what counts as religion in the first place. And therefore, he is kind of using Derrida's term to describe how a very specific Western Christian and Roman influenced worldview was rebranded as universal. and he's kind of looking into the way in which the Protestant model became a universal reference point to understand what is the definition of religion. So, we often assume religion is about voluntary association, that is, joining a group by choice, and a private belief, what you think in your head. Stolow argues that this actually is a post Reformation Protestant ideal, not a universal truth. And therefore, the power play is that by calling this specific model, that is the Protestant model, religion, the West positioned itself as the father or the guardian of the civilized world. Anything that didn't fit this model was labeled primitive or traditional. The modern nation state isn't actually the opposite of religion, it is a secularized version of it. So basically, there was a kind of a wrong way in which the terminology was used. So if it was not in the West, and West was kind of classified as modern, then what was traditional was which was something that was not in the West, and therefore religion kind of goes into the opposite team, and modern Western countries were kind of labeled as secularized, opposed to traditional society, which was considered as more religious. So there was the error in the way in which this discourse was was using the definition of religion. So when we look into the understanding of modern state, we realize that the state didn't replace religious power. It cannibalized religious structures, myths, vocabularies to build its own authority. Jeremy Stolow argues that modern institutions, that is schools, factories, hospitals, functions through the disciplinary powers that were originally religious. The Weberian root is in kind of looking back to Max Weber's understanding of the Protestant religion, and the text, as we have already discussed in the previous lecture, the text suggests that the modern worker's mindset, that is, as a modern worker, you have to be rational, disciplined, self-denying. So these were some of the ethics which was articulated by the Protestants, and this comes in the kind of helps us to understand the Protestant asceticism. Even if the government claims to be secular, its core is colored by religious ideas of inner loneliness and predestination. So, nationalism often presents itself as a political movement, but the author here, Stolow, describes it as a parasitic on religious narratives. So, if we look into the how we understand modern state according to Stolow, he says that the state takes the bones of religion and dresses them in a flag. And therefore, if you look into this table, we see there are certain religious concept which has been kind of equated to nationalist equivalent. The first is creation or salvation, which is a religious concept, and when we look into the nationalist equivalent, it implies myths of national birth or awakening. So the whole idea is that religiously you will achieve salvation here. To be a true citizen is to have that national awakening. The second is martyrdom, which is a religious concept. The national equivalent is cult worship of the glorious dead. So we kind of consider the war heroes or those who lose their life during the wars as glorious, kind of achieving the highest form of salvation or death. The third concept is theodicy, which is a problem of evil. And the nationalist equivalent is the spectre of the national enemies or the hard times. And the fourth religious concept is divine mission. The nationalist equivalent is manifest destiny or the white man's burden. So basically, he is trying to cite the kind of look into how there is not kind of much difference when we look into the discourse of religion and nationalist equivalence. Then Jeremy Stolow cites the work of thinkers like Walter Benjamin and Giorgio Agamben. They argue that the very foundations of modern law and sovereignty aren't based on pure logic, but they are based on number one, mystical foundation. The transcendental force of law feels absolute because it mimics divine authority. Second, it's a divine violence. The state power to decide over life and death, biopolitics, rest on ancient assumptions about fate and expiation, that is, atonement through punishment. And therefore, when we look into the understanding of modern states, we see that there is a hidden religion of the secular. The main takeaway from this chapter by Jeremy Stolow is the reversal of the secularization theory. So, when we have the old view, which says that modernity is equivalent to the death of religion in public life, Jeremy Stolow would argue that modernity is equivalent to rebranding of religious power into state power. So, the national civil subject, that is the modern citizen, is produced by institutions that use religious techniques of discipline to ensure loyalty and order. So, basically he is giving us the germ theory of religion. Jeremy Stolow uses a powerful metaphor here, citing Arjun Appadulai. If we assume the modern nation state is a healthy secular body, then we start to see religious movements as germ or an invading force that saps the lifeblood of democracy. This perspective views religion as something that was supposed to be dead or repressed but has come back to haunt modernity. He also refers to Habermas and notes that some see modern religious visibility as a step backward into the Middle Age, that is feudalism, rather than a modern development. Stolow flips the script on globalization. Instead of religion being a victim of globalization, which is the larger debate given by modern scholars who were looking into the way modernity was bringing about change, here we were kind of not looking at religion as a victim, but religion was actually its pioneer. Long before modern corporation or the internet, religious organizations were connecting distant cultures, spread education and healthcare across continents. Sufi brotherhood and Buddhist monastic orders, they were examples of the fact that trade routes were kind of created transnational networks of trust and exchange. Many research communities have outlived the empire and kingdom that tried to govern them. Jeremy Stolow suggests that we must stop looking at religion and the state as two different teams playing on the same field. Instead, we should see that, number one, that the state is religious. Now, these are the new research agenda for that he is kind of advocating. And when we see the state as religious, it's using sacred myths of sacrifice and destiny to maintain power. Second, religion is global. It has always operated on a scale that nation states are only now trying to master. So, when we look into his reading on religion, media and globalization, we see that there are certain key terms which has been defined, and before that we kind of look into how the media acts as a bridge. Media is the environment where these two forces, the sacred and the global religion, compete for visibility. So, we have looked into the term, that is the germ theory given by Stolow, which is a biased view that religious movements are infection in a secular society. The second term is refeudalization, the fear that religion in public life represents a return to pre-modern dark age. And the third step redefined is transnational scale system like the Sufi order that ignore national borders and have done so for centuries. So, basically it is kind of helping us to understand the idea that there is a kind of map for studying religion in the 21st century, where we have the religion as a component, not just belief but a historically constructed category that is always mediated. And then we have the second component, which is the media. Medias are not just tools, but the entire environment, technology, symbolic, economic, where religion happens. The third is globalization, that is not a new thing for religion, but a restructuring of ancient transnational networks through new tech. And the fourth concept is the secular, not the absence of religion, but a rebranded version of religious power used by nation states. So, with this whole understanding of the three being mediated and connected to each other, we have a refined understanding of religion in contemporary times. With this, I come to an end of this lecture. Thank you.